relationship between Daemon and Laena in House of the Dragon is one of the elements of the show that left me feeling a little bit disappointed. It was not until I had rewatched the show for a second time that it finally clicked what I had trouble with. Daemon and Laena's relationship is one of the many victims of that first 10-year time jump. For the most part, the time jump worked okay, better than I thought it would. However, many events we should have seen on screen were not. This is fundamentally what is wrong with Daemon and Laena's relationship, and much of her character as an adult as a whole. Up until Rhaenyra's wedding to Laenor, Daemon and Laena had hardly said a word to each other. Off the top of my head, I can't think of an instance of it. At the wedding itself, we get some fleeting looks and are done. Then the very next episode, they've been married years, are living in Pentos and have 2 daughters. It's hard to really get emotionally invested in the relationship and Laena as a character when such a huge part of her story happens off screen. The reason I say she's a casualty of the time skip is because while I missed stuff that was not shown, I do understand from a screenwriting and TV adaptation point of view why they were needed. I studied film production at university and my master's degree was in media as well. I did a lot of screenwriting in this time, and a tool that I would use to help me learn the process of script writing is adapting random books to screenplays. I wrote my dissertation specifically about why some adaptations work while others fail, and something I found is sadly, however much you love an element of a source material, in the process of bringing it to screen, some things just don't work or can't for a multitude of reasons, from pace to the story timeline and so on. While I understand why the time skips were needed to happen, if they wanted to end the first season at Storm's End, I do think they could have got across what happened during that time in a better way. Now, I do actually think House of the Dragon did an alright job at expanding Laena's character. I thought, as a child, and definitely her interaction with Viserys when she's being proposed as his new wife, really helps the audience understand her as a character and informs the viewer of the kind of woman she will grow up to be. From reading the books, I knew what direction the show was heading in with Laena, so seeing Laena as a child, I could begin to understand why Daemon might later find her intriguing. I could see qualities in her, from her confidence to attitude, that would draw him to her, and I hoped we would get a bit more information and context to their relationship than we do in Fire and Blood. House of the Dragon has done a great job with this, with other characters, so why not again with Laena? Again, it comes back to the awkward timing in the story, and the need for a time jump. We never really learn much about Daemon and Laena's relationship, other than the short time we have of them in Pentos years later. Now, let's talk about Fire and Blood for a moment, because the context of Daemon and Laena's marriage seems very different from the direction the show took. At least from my point of view. Now, Fire and Blood being what it is, an in-world history book, we are missing the finer details of characters' motivations. But from what I take away from the book is Daemon married Laena as simply to check his falling status after the marriage of Rhaenyra to Laenor and the birth of her children. You can also speculate this was also a tactical move, as by marrying Laena, he would de facto be closer to Rhaenyra, thus having better access to her. And as we see once Daemon and Laena return to Driftmark after their tour in Essos and birth of their daughters, they spend a lot of time visiting Rhaenyra on Dragonstone and vice versa, to the point Laena wanted Rhaenyra at her side during her last pregnancy and labour that ultimately claimed her life. Now, you can infer that maybe Daemon had some kind of romantic feeling for his wife, and that his marriage to her was not purely politically motivated. To me, the tour of Essos suggests this, highlighting their adventurous nature, and to some degree, the show does suggest this as well. But even if that is so, the marriage was still primarily the savvy political and tactical move by Daemon, and I think even during the course of their marriage, he never gave up his ultimate goal of Rhaenyra. I do often wonder what would have happened if Laena had not died. Would Daemon have just moved on from Rhaenyra? Look how quickly after Laena's death he marries Rhaenyra. You can understand why it was so scandalous, more so in the show, when it had literally been maybe a couple of weeks maximum since Laena's death. Now, the time skip itself. Due to the timeline in the show generally being quite different from the book, events were never going to play out exactly how they do in Fire and Blood. There are elements of the time skip I was okay with. For example, changing their honeymoon tour of Essos to them living in Pentos for 10 years and raising their kids there. It was a great way to still include the Essos part of their story. However, by not having them living on Driftmark after the birth of Rhaena and Baela, we do lose that friendship between Laena and Rhaenyra, which would have been nice to see on screen. I always found the idea of Daemon and Laena touring Essos on Dragonback a very compelling part of their relationship. You can tell a lot about them as people from it. Plus, we get to see loads of cool places in Essos we never got to see in the main books or show. I mean, hey, maybe they did go on their tour before settling in Pentos, and it was just never touched upon. But I suppose they could have still done the tour and stayed in Pentos after the birth of their daughters, rather than returning to Driftmark. This leads me back to the time skip. Without seeing Daemon and Laena's relationship develop in any way at all on screen, we're left feeling disconnected from them as characters, especially with Laena, as it's all just very jarring. We go from them dancing at a wedding to them being married for 10 years, with 2 kids in a seemingly or at least a slightly unfulfilled and unhappy relationship, with tensions about their current situation. This is a huge leap. The characters have been through a lot during this time and we saw none of it, thus creating the disconnect. I really liked Laena when she was a kid and found her very compelling, but after the time skip, we're on our 3rd recasting. So much has happened off screen I can hardly recognise her as the same character she was, talking to Viserys about dragons. You do still see the person she became, a dragon rider, but most of all, a loving mother to both her children. The brief time we have with her and her children is a great way to show the contrast in how Daemon treats them, and perhaps highlight the mechanics of their relationship. She misses her mother, her father and brother deeply, and we can see that family is everything to her. This is where we come to her death. I personally prefer the book version where she's given birth to her baby, who also sadly dies, and never recovers from her labour. She tries to sneak off to fly Vhagar one last time, where Daemon finds her collapsed on the stairs dead. There is a very touching scene where Daemon carries her body back to the bed, which I think would have been a great moment on screen. Could have been a basis for bonding with his daughters, something that in itself was very lacking in terms of relationship building. Now, upon a rewatch, I don't hate the show's death as much as I did at first. I can see what the writers were going for trying to give Laena more control and agency, and I think after the birth scene with Emma Arryn in episode 1, having Laena take her fate into her own hands was needed, if just to keep the media off the show's back after the outcry of the gruesomeness of Emma's fate. I can only think of some of the clickbait headlines if Laena had died in a similar way to Emma, but for me, that part of it is not too important. What this scene does is begin to set up the concept that dragons themselves have some form of agency and free will, even when they're bonded to a rider. Showing Vhagar's reluctance to burn her rider, even though she is being ordered to, helps lay the groundwork for this info, and in a way helps make the events shown in episode 10, with Vhagar killing Luke, have a bit of alluding to. Here's the thing, and for me, where you really see the damage of the time skip and the lost years we never got to see. Laena's death was supposed to be this big, emotional, dramatic, powerful moment, a sad end to a fantastic character. But for me, her death just didn't hit the mark on any of these points. I didn't personally have that emotional reaction I think the writers were going for. Maybe it's because I knew what was coming, and that surprise factor, maybe knowing her fate, stopped me from making that connection with her as a character. But I think it goes deeper than that, and it all comes back to the point of the video. Daemon and Laena's relationship did not work due to the unfortunate need for such a big time jump in order to make the season work in terms of the timeline. All the key events we needed to see to establish them together and add meat to the characters were lost during that skip. I do believe if we saw more of them together, then Laena's death would be much more impactful for me than it was. What is vital to remember is Laena is the biggest victim of this time skip, not just because of the character building we lost, also because of the lack of screen time we had with her before and after the skip. It's why Daemon and Rhaenyra do not suffer the same issues to the extent that Laena does. We simply had more time to know them. However, what I will also acknowledge is you can't solely blame the time skip for this. If you've been following the channel for a while, you know that The Last Kingdom is my #1 TV show. Yes, more than Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. The books are equal in my heart as well. So, just a spoiler warning for Season 1 of The Last Kingdom, if you ever intend to watch it. But in Season 1, the main character, Uhtred, has a relationship with a woman called Iseult, who dies in quite a shocking twist and only appears in 3 episodes. However, the impact this character has on the show and Uhtred himself is hard to put into words. Her death raises the stakes of the importance of the battle in that episode greatly, but during the last season of the show, you can still see Iseult had an impact on Uhtred decades after her death. The relationship between Uhtred and Iseult, and her as a character who was only on screen for such a short amount of time, but is also so impactful despite that. Yes, The Last Kingdom is a smaller scale and more focused story than House of the Dragon, but it goes to show with limited time, excellent casting, and good writing, you can still create fulfilling character relationships. In the grand scheme of things, Is Laena an important part of the story? No. She could be seen as quite a minor character, but by giving more time to build her relationship with Daemon, it would not only make her death so much more impactful, but also help humanize and add to Daemon as well. But I really want to see what you guys feel, as I know things like this could be very subjective. And to be honest, I've learnt a lot from the comment section, as I get to see many different points of view. So please let me know what you think of Laena in House of the Dragon, and how you think the time skip was handled, and how you feel about her death.